Massive spoiler warning ahead. So this YouTube channel called The Take has made this playlist called The Best of Thrones, which includes analyses of specific episodes of Game of Thrones. So we're talking about this episode, the one with the deep fried King's Landing. I normally don't find Game of Thrones very interesting, but this episode in particular was fascinating. If not just for the public reaction, the idea the episode embodies is crazy. The bells, and to a greater extent Game of Thrones, pushes forward this thesis that humanity is bad, or at least definitely not flawless. Even when the show seemed to pivot towards a very black and white morality between its characters, by the end of the episode, the most right characters were often the most pragmatic. You could argue that seasons 1 through 5 had a lot of ambiguity in people's actions, but you could also generally agree with maybe a handful of people's decisions like Sansa, Jon, Daenerys sort of, and Sam. However, when season 6 starts, the show becomes a lot more about the White Walkers and other cartoonishly evil threats like the Boltons. None of the crimes the wildlings commit are brought up anymore, and it's all about people coming together to beat down their evil enemies. This and the focus on Jon gives us a very clear black and white kind of battle. The morally gray people like Varys and Tyrion slink around the sidelines and are generally discouraged for being more pragmatic and doing what's necessary, as opposed to what's right. Poor Varys, he predicted the future and he was turned into a number 3 on the Popeyes menu. This episode critiques the idea of those absolute heroes like Jon or Daenerys by tearing them down. It marks a turning point in the recent narrative of humanity versus absolute evil. Even though the White Walkers and the Night King are dead, the show must go on. There are more enemies to defeat and more plot threads to resolve. The episode brings back the idea of, hey, there are no virtuous heroes without any blood on their hands. And when it comes to war, everyone's committing atrocities. There's a clear line in the episode that's crossed. Mid-episode, we transition from the new paradigm of noble heroes back to the realism of the first 5 seasons. Daenerys has been tested beyond measure. She has lost a good chunk of the Dothraki and Unsullied, lost 2 of her dragons, and lost Missandei. The audience doesn't know what's going to happen. She executes Varys, but this isn't inconsistent with the firm conqueror that she was. After all, look at the Tarlys. When the Battle of King's Landing pauses, it looks like Daenerys' forces have won, because they did. Jon, Tyrion, and Davos are relieved, like, whew! Looks like we didn't have to kill any innocent people. It's Liddy! Too bad it gets Liddy in another type of way. This is when the other shoe drops. This is when the writers are like, hey, you and your expectations created by those last 2 seasons, fuck those. And instead of a triumph over her darker impulses, Daenerys makes an arguably too sudden turn to madness. She roasts King's Landing. She initiates a slaughter. Grey Worm viciously tears apart surrendered soldiers. Jon's forces go around killing and raping civilians, and he can't even stop any of this, and neither can Davos or Tyrion. While these guys were fighting the White Walkers and Night King, they were holding the moral high ground very securely. They were humanity's army against the dead. And they were heroes. Look at them. Look at them celebrating after the battle. People smashing, getting titles. And now, they're vicious monsters. This is humanity. This is war. And this challenges this comforting notion that the previous episode laid out, that hey, humanity could be in a good place. All we gotta do is have Dany or Jon be on the throne and we're all good. But nah. 2 foreign armies and the equivalent of a nuke invade a territory. There's no way that ends cleanly. The Bells pivots back and reminds you why Ned died, how the Red Wedding went, and how simply unfair the battle against human nature is. When it comes to war and violence, corruption will always win out over honor. The most honorable people in the show, arguably Jon and Davos, are left trying to do what they can. Jon can't even control his Northmen and has to kill one of them. The supposed King of the North holds no sway when compared to the terrors of war. And that's the worst part. The show brings back these characters who were sidelined from the ideological limelight. The pragmatic Tyrion, Varys, and Sansa are basically proven to be right the whole time. Before this, their time was dedicated to Jon or Daenerys consistently shooting their ideas down or overriding them. But Varys was right, and so was Tyrion, and so was Sansa. These very adept players at the game knew what was at risk and advised so. And no one knows this better than Jon. The look on his face when he realizes, fuck, I gotta kill my aunt/girlfriend next episode, is hilarious. I don't see Jon recovering from any of this and becoming the one true ruler of Westeros, and why should he? His morality and his code are shown to be his limits. He is exactly like Ned, and Ned was shown to be probably an unfit ruler. Even though Varys thinks he would be a just ruler, it's shown that Jon doesn't have what it takes to make a hard choice against his loyalties and his honor. Jon basically says, "You're my queen," and allows Daenerys to do whatever when she's clearly not in the best state to rule. He could have stopped all this, but he chose not to. Not only that, but after seeing his men disobey his orders to sexually assault and kill innocent people, why would he want to rule over these men? I don't even think he'd want to fight alongside them anymore. He's probably just gonna fuck off and join the wildlings when the show's over. At least the wildlings are very acutely aware of their place in the world and who they are. The Bells shows the ugliness of humanity, and the ugliness of individual people trying to rule. Even our Bastion of Goodness, Jon Snow, failed. Daenerys, Breaker of Chains, failed. Tyrion failed. And if everyone is already collectively awful, and our main good guys are also awful, who are the heroes? Who are the good guys? And I think the answer is, there are no good guys. Game of Thrones isn't that simple. At least not after the defeat of the Night King. The execution might not have been great, but the idea is pretty cool. Everyone in the world is following this show, and they basically got bamboozled into thinking it was not gonna have an ending like this. Maybe this will be followed up with the conclusion that preaches pragmatism. Sansa's the closest thing the show has to a good ruler, cool under pressure, good at decision making, and has her people's interests at heart. And maybe Tyrion too, maybe as a pair. Or maybe this is the show's main point that criticizes war, politics, and monarchies. Without this imbalanced form of government, perhaps we wouldn't have the political power struggles that ended up creating these wars. This whole system in Westeros, this Game of Thrones, brings out the worst in humanity. It turns normal people into fodder or monsters. Maybe the show is about the end of the Game of Thrones. Maybe the real enemy of the show isn't the White Walkers, but the stupid game that distracted humanity in the first place. I'm sure that this game has killed more people than the White Walkers have. Even the most pragmatic people don't want to overturn the government but install some sort of control. How's the show gonna end? With another all-powerful monarchy, this time led by Sansa? With a republic established by Tyrion? No matter the result, the Bells showed us that even the best of humanity can falter to the monstrosities of war. And history has taught us that if there are any universal constants, so far, war is one of them. Vis-a-vis, ergo concordantly. Westeros is fucked no matter what, dudes. Thanks for watching, and I'd like to say thank you to The Take for making this playlist. And hey, if you like this video, feel free to make your own. And then tweet at The Take, and I'll put their tag here, and you can submit your own video to the playlist. And as always, stay cool, and stay fleshy.